The Korean War ran from June 25th of 1950 until July 27th of 1953. During that time, almost 104,000 Americans were wounded and almost 37,000 Americans were killed. I'm Thomas Carroll. Join me while we take a look back at the forgotten faces from a forgotten war. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Forgotten Faces podcast. Join me as we hear the story from PFC Orville Dean. Orville Dean was a member of the 7th Infantry Division. He fought in Korea. He was part of the last battle for Pork Chop Hill. And he talks about his childhood. He talks about his time in the war. And he spends some time talking about his life after the war. I really didn't even have to ask any questions. He had his whole story. He told it the way he wanted to tell it, which is how I want these podcast episodes to go. And I mostly just sat and listened in awe about the life that Orville Dean has led. So, join along. I hope you enjoy his story.
Oops.
Los Angeles, California. I came back here, went to Kansas City, went from there to Camp Crowder, Missouri. Signed in there. They gave us our uniforms and all that stuff there. We was there about 2 days. I went from there to Fort Bliss, Texas, where I took 8 weeks infantry and 8 weeks artillery. I took 8 weeks basic on 120 millimeter aircraft guns and half tracks with quad 50 machine gun mounts on them. Then after that I had 8 weeks infantry there, and then, after I finished basics there, I went from there to Fort Ord. Lost my record. I stayed there about 4 days. Went from Fort Ord to Fort Lewis. Stayed there a week. Went from there to Fort Lawton, Washington, and I stayed there at the Anti-Aircraft Operations Center until December of '53 when I shipped out for Korea.
Okay,
now going to Korea, we docked at Yokohama, Japan. I went overseas as a cannoneer on a 120 millimeter aircraft gun. We docked at Yokohama, Japan, and I went to a field wire pole line school at Edojima, Japan.
Oh wow!
I went over on the General Housing. It was nice. Weather was nice leaving. We left Seattle. It was nice. We got out about 3 days. They got into a real bad storm. They locked everybody below deck. The bow would go up in the air, come down, slap the water. You just make a big noise, and when the bow went down, the fantail screws came out of the water, and our whole ship it just shuddered like they were shaking the bolts out of it from one end to the other. And it was doing that, going up and down that way, and rocking back and forth sideways all at the same time. It taken 8 days going over it like instead of usually do, it took us 12.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun at all.
Yeah, they put me and another buddy clearing the butcher detail, which clearing the bottom of the ship. And that steward, he come down, he rolled out a big block of cheese and set 2 or 3 boxes of crackers on the counter. And he said, I want to tell you guys something. He said, don't tell them who told you, but he said, if you just keep your stomach full, eat on this cheese and crackers till we get a cough, you'll be all right. So we ate cheese and crackers, almost ate that whole block of cheese, and didn't get sick.
Let me go back a second. You were, refresh my memory, you were with the 3rd Infantry Division, right? The 7th?
7th, I was in the headquarters company, 1st Battalion, 17th Regiment, 7th Division.
Okay. All right.
When I left Yokohama, I went to Seoul. They loaded us on trucks and took us up to a little processing center there, where they gave me a flak jacket, gave me my web harness and on them little rings on the flak jacket. They hung a hand grenade on each one of them. They gave me a carbine, gave me 6 30-round clips taped back to back, gave me 6 15-round clips and a handful of loose shells in my pocket, and marched us up. The Chinese was attacking. It was either Yokononko or Arsenal and Erie, one of the other outposts. They marched us up. We sat right behind the hill on the other side for probably a half mile. We could hear the battle going on. But they set us right there behind that hill, ready to go in case they broke through. That one buddy looked at me and he said, "Holy shit!" He said, "I didn't need to see this early. Just getting here." He didn't know, but I was thinking the same thing. but they did need us, and after that, from the rest of the time in Korea, I spent all my time. I was in Korea January of '53 and left in December of '53. I was late getting there. But all the rest of my time in Korea, from there, we was in the Pork Chop Hill area. Never stayed in any camp very long. The only one I was in for probably a week or two was at Camp Baker. I was in there for a while. I was at Camp Casey, maybe 3 days. But the rest of the time, we were in bunkers or on tents. All that time I was in the Pork Chop Hill area. I was a field wireman and board operator.
Oh, okay.
For the last battle for Pork Chop Hill was the 6th to the 11th of July 1953. They been on and off of it. They didn't know whether it was worth keeping, according to what Pam and John was talking about. And towards the end, they finally just walked off and let them have it. But from the 6th to the 11th, they were pulling guys. Any of the guys that whatever they were doing, they were giving them ammunition and sending them to the front. Well, this other Pete Parada from Santa Rosa, California, we were the newest ones there, so they stuck us on the company switchboard. And so to rotate off and on, we spent 3 hours on and 3 hours off. And they told us whatever we did, they didn't care if they blew that bunker down around our ears. Keep that switchboard running. We had a hot loop set up where they had one to the headquarters company in the rear, the main one. They had one to the mortar company, had one to the field artillery, and then they had one running from each one. If there was any outposts out, they had lines from the outposts just automatically set up, and we just had to keep them running. If one was knocked out, we either had to get a hold of one of the linemen that was out, or if we couldn't get a hold of one of them linemen, we had to go find it and fix it ourselves. So for those, I think it was 5 days, boy, our bunker was back. Pork Chop Hill was lower than most of the other hills there. So our bunker, I was 3/4 of a mile behind Pork Chop Hill, right at the foot of Hill 200, where it made a curve to the supply road. And right on our bunker was backed up against the bottom of the hill, where artillery couldn't get to us. But we could look out our bunker door, and artillery shells during that deal was exploding probably a half a block or a block in front of where we were. And they had right on the hill above us, they had a half track with a Deuce quad 50, and they had a tank on the hill getting right above us. And for those days when the Chinese got on the hill, that half track quad 50s and that tank, they were firing almost all the time. They fired we was in a bunker, had sandbags and stuff on the top of it. When those things would fire on top of the hill, there was such a concussion, just a little bit of the sand and dust would come down through the top of the bunker. But after that was over with, well, the 11th of that is when we lost one of the best officers there ever was in the war, was Major Billy Fritz. He was directing artillery from outpost to a place they called the Rat rat pack or something like that, rat's nest or something. They were taking artillery, and he was standing in the door of the bunker that he was an OP-13, and an artillery shell landed too close there, and took his head off.
Oh, gee.
But and after that was all over with, Stars and Stripes had a paper out. They said that area, not just where we were, but that whole area where Pork Chop Hill, that whole area in there, said as close as they can figure, the enemy fired about 170 artillery shells on that area during those 5 or 6 days, whatever it was.
Wow. That's plenty to keep your head down.
Yeah. It's that one buddy of mine he'd go out. He was from Lafayette. Lafayette down south, and the other guy was from over by in Arkansas. But Bobby, he was just a little small. So if they'd be out, they started getting shelled. Bill Owens, he was a size guy. He'd run and throw himself on top of Gil. Gil said, "What in the hell are you doing that for?" He said, "Well, I'm just trying to save you." He said, "Yeah, but you're squashing me at the same time."
That's funny. I'm mildly curious. What did you think of Korea? Of the country itself, I should say.
Well, really, I would have loved to have seen Korea in peacetime.
Yeah.
Korea is a beautiful country. I would love to see Korea in the peacetime. I have a bunch of. I carried a August C3 35mm camera, and I carried a little Brownie 127, and I carried one of them little bitty 16mm Pixie cameras all the time I was over there. And I got a whole box of pictures. I got a bunch of pictures of Camp Baker where we were there. But Korea was a beautiful country. I have pictures of some of the guys just outside Seoul. I don't remember whether we was going up or whether we was coming back. But I got a picture of a bunch of the guys with some of the Korean kids. We was always giving them in our rations, we always had chocolate bars. So we was giving the Korean kids the chocolate bars and giving them our sea rations whenever we see the kids. There at Fort Baker, one day I found a little pug dog that was running around. I got a picture on there of me holding that little pug.
No.
Yeah, about a week or so after that, our first sergeant, Sergeant King, he found a little pup of some kind that got pictures of him holding it. That's only 2 dogs I seen while I was over there.
Wow.
So we was there. We knew they were bringing in that big 280mm rail gun, but we didn't know when. And boy, that when they shot that and that thing went over our area, it sounded like they had shot a freight train over us. That thing, I mean, it really howled. But we knew it was in Korea, but we didn't know they was moving it up a couple, 4 or 5 miles behind where we were.
Oh, wow.
But it was that's one of those deals where I had one of my brothers. He arrived in Pearl Harbor December the 8th, 1941. And my other brother, he was in that 506 Parachute Infantry, 101st Airborne. He was in that band of brothers.
Oh, really? Wow.
All of them. My brother Wilbur, he brought back the copies of the newspaper that they printed about the attack on Pearl Harbor. I sold it to a guy. He kept bugging me about it, and I sold it to him, and he gave it to the high school up here. But he brought it back. There's a couple of pages on there pictures of battleship roll, the battleship burning and sinking.
Mm-hmm.
It said the Arizona sank in 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And then he was also in those atomic tests at Bikini Atoll, the Operation Crossroads. He had the pictures of the test that he couldn't even show until probably 8-9 years ago. He wasn't supposed to do anything with them. But anyway, after that, where he could, he gave them to me, and I copied them off in there. I got them in my computer. He said he was on the LCT 1420 salvage ship, and they gave him, said they were probably 3/4 of a mile, something like that, away from when they seen the blast. He said they gave him hard hat, covered glasses, and earplugs. And he said, boy, he said, when that blast, he said, you could feel the pressure from that blast where he was. But he said what really got him, he said, when that bomb went off, he said the man standing beside you could see his skeleton.
Oh.
Yeah,
Wow.
he said, he said, you're not going to believe that. But he said it was true. He said when that blast went off, you could see the guy's skeleton, the bones, the guy standing beside you. And he said probably 3/4 to an hour after that blast, they were back on some of those ships, their old ships, using saltwater hoses trying to wash the radiation off of them.
Yeah.
He always thought he fell when he was on the USS Bushnell subtender, I think it was, fell on something and screwed up his ribs. But after he got out, he was always kind of having trouble. But he thought maybe it was, cancer from being a radiation nest stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But he goes to the VA. They didn't do hardly anything. The guy, he took a blood test and checked his heart, see how his heart was, and checked him for arthritis and that. And then he said, "No, you're off. You're fine. It wasn't service connected." So he just passed here 2017.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't know. You don't know how good you have it till you get in another country like that. I had.
So, what did you do after you came home from the war?
I came back. I went to Incheon, and the tide was out, so I had to settle my duffel bag with my rifle across the lap, waiting for the tide to come in. So when the tide finally came in, where we could load on the ship, I came back on the general post, and we docked at L.A. I went to camp. I can't remember what the hell the name of that camp was right there. And anyway, I went to it, and from there, I went to Camp Carson, Colorado, December 53, and I got discharged there. I came back to Hiawatha, Kansas, to see a girlfriend and my grandmother, and then I went through from there. I went to Topeka, and I got a jump flight there to Palm Springs, and I went back to Indio, California, and went to work for a date farmer. I worked there for that date farmer for, up till about 1958, I think it was. Then my boss came out and he said, "I got a better job for you. Safeway Prepack or Rexford Prepack had a place there in Indio where they packed carrots and grapefruit and stuff like that. So they got me a job there as dock foreman. I stayed there till 1959. Then when my daughter was born, she would have convulsions at night. Her brain wasn't, she's okay later on, but her brain wasn't quite stable. She was having convulsions.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved from there back to St. Joe, Missouri, come back to my grandmother's. Then I got a job at Beatty's produce grocery stores. I worked for them till they closed. Then I went to work in St. Joe for a place called Richmond Anchor Screw. I worked for them for a while. Then we went back to California with my aunt and my cousins. So I went to work for the forestry there, planting little 1-inch, 12-inch trees on the side of the mountains where the forest fire burned them off. I did that for a while, and then I went to Placerville Fruit Growers Association, and we were making the assault packages for the Air Force. It's like the packages have got a P-38 in it, and it's got a little thing of coffee and sugar. We packed those for the Air Force. Then I went to, after that was through, I went to a place in Sacramento, which Sacramento, El Dorado Veneer. They made veneer, like paneling for houses and stuff. I did that for a while, and then we came back to Kansas again, and I went to work at the Wildy Tool Company in Hiawatha. I worked there for 36 years. I worked there from 1965 up to 2001. And then I run a 10,000-pound drop hammer forging. I don't remember the number of them anymore, but it'd be, you know what water pump pliers are. I was forging them. I've done that for probably run that hammer for about 20 years.
Wow.
Then I got carpal tunnel and tendonitis in my left hand, and I couldn't do that anymore. So I worked up till I was 70. Then I quit. Then after I quit, later on I was down at Walmart. I had one of the braces on my left hand, and some old lady there after, she said, "What are you doing?" "What? I don't need to be preachy, but," she said, "What's the matter with your hand?" And I told her. She said, "Well, I was looking at stuff on the shelf." She gave me a bottle of Aleve. I think it was 500 milligram Aleve. She said my son had the same thing from being in the National Guard. Said he took these, took 2 a day, one in the morning and one at night, and she said it helped. So I did the same thing. So about 6 months later, I don't know whether it was in my head or whether I really had tendonitis or that in my arm, but after about 6 months, I took those Aleve. It was all gone. If I'd have known it then, I could have worked longer. Whatever it was. But when I retired, I really retired. After I retired, I never hit a lick.
You certainly stayed busy with your time afterwards, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was never one, even when I was a kid. When I was 13, 14 years old, I was born in Hiawatha, Kansas. When I was 3, I moved to Walden, just outside of Kansas City. And at 13, 14 years old, I was stocking shelves in a grocery store. I was working part-time at the feed store there, and part-time doing some cleaning and emptying trash at the filling station there. Well, then, what time that wasn't, I couldn't do that. I mowed people's yards. I hoed gardens. I sold cloverine salve. I sold flower seeds. I sold garden seeds. I've done anything I could do to make a little money.
Yeah.
Our neighbor had a Remington 22 automatic rifle I wanted. I hoed his garden and mowed his yard for almost a year in order to get that 22. But I was always, nothing was ever handed to me like it is to kids now. These kids now, if they lived across the street from the school, they'd have to drive. I went to grade school in Welborn. Like from our backyard, there was a place called the Right-of-Way where there used to be a streetcar track run from Kansas City to Leavenworth. I could look across and see the football field behind our school. But in the wintertime, back in those days, it snowed. You couldn't see the tops of the fence posts. Well, my dad was afraid we'd fall in a ditch or something, so I had to go around through Wellborn, and that was about 6 blocks. But for high school, that was out of Bethel. That was 6 miles, and there was no school bus, and the only bus that run was a Greyhound at 3 o'clock in the morning. So my brother and I, every morning and every night, we walked that 6 miles to school.
Wow.
No matter what the weather was, my dad worked for the railroad. He was a switchman crew. So when I got bad weather, they had a little booth, like a telephone booth with a little fuel oil heater in it. He'd have to stay down there overnight where they could keep the ice out of the switches so the switches would work. So sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 days before he could come home. So my brother and I and a neighbor girl, we'd get up a couple hours early before we went to school, and Mama would fix Dad a lunch and a thermos bottle of coffee, and we'd take off through the timber and take his thermos lunch down to him, then come back and go to school. And then that night we'd do the same thing again, take him down to dinner.
Wow.
But I was never one to just sit around. A lot of people say, "Oh, I can't find a job." I've never been out of a job over a day or two. There was a lot of jobs I turned down because I just didn't want them. But I was never had any problem finding a job.
Yeah, and
right now I'm 90. I just turned 90 the 31st of May. Only thing, in 2016, I had to have a heart valve replaced. And I told them, I said, if you can do it without having to open up my chest, okay. If you have to do it that way, I'm not doing it. So they went on my right side, right behind my tip. They went between those ribs there, and they went in at the groin, and they had a place on my chest. They called it a chest guard. So they done it that way. So besides that, I'm in good shape. Doctor told me the other day, he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I get up in the morning, said I eat about 4 or 5 slices of bacon, a cup of coffee. I drink a 6 couple of slices of toast. And I said, I got a bottle of a margarita that's already mixed in the fridge. I got a little plastic thing like you take for cough syrup. Said I take one of them every morning and every night." He said, "Well, just keep right on what you're doing." He said, "Oh, well, your health is a goddamn horse."
Well, you sound spunky as ever.
Sir?
Did you sound spunky as
Do
ever?
what? Yeah. Yeah, I can still, most of my kids, I'm better at shaping my kids. My daughter has rheumatoid arthritis. My son that lives with me, since my wife just passed 9/19/2015. If she'd have made it 6 more weeks, we'd have been married 60 years.
Wow.
But she didn't. That was kind of I was in Korea in a switchboard during that battle for Fort Chop Hill. The mail came, and Pete Pilata said, he said, "Let me go ahead and take the shift early and go check your mail and everything." So I opened my mail, and there was a letter from my brother showing a picture of his wedding. And on the right side was a picture of my wife. I didn't know her name. I didn't know nothing. Our company sergeant came around, and I said, "That's right there. That's the woman I'm going to marry when I get home." He just chuckled. So when I got home and back to Indio, I guess the family had told the boss or some of them people about that. So I finally found out her name was Delcy Christine Housley. So her and two of her friends were walking up the street in front of the date shed, and that guy says, "Isn't that the girl you was going to marry?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how are you going to marry if you don't know her?" So he said, "Get your ass out there." So I went out and introduced myself to her, and that was about the latter part of '54. And then we had about 4 or 5 dates, and November 11th of 1955, we were married. Then we come back here in Nebraska, used to always have Korean War veterans reunions, and they had one in Grand Island. It was 1995. So I went, my wife and my daughter went with me. They had 1,600 Korean veterans there. They had a busload come down from Wyoming, but there was 16 of the guys that I was in my wire team in Korea showed up there. So afterwards, the Sergeant Stack asked me, "So where do you live?" And I said, "Hiawatha, Kansas." I said, "Oh, my daughter has a farm and we're living it." And so they come down to the Hiawatha and wanted to spend 2 or 3 days at the house before they went back. As soon as he got out of the car, he said, "Did you marry that girl you was talking about that you was in Korea?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Where's she at?" She said, "I got to see her." And I was just sitting right up there on the porch. He remembered all that time.
Wow.
So we made it almost 60 years.
Wow.
But, you know, I told the kids when I had that heart valve, I guess that was about 6 hours. I told them then. I said, "Hey," I said, if I go tonight, I said, I've had a fantastic life. I really have. I said, I'm happy with my life. I had a good wife. I had great kids. Everything's been doing fine. So I said, if I drop dead tonight, I said, I'm happy. I've had a great life.
That's good. Fulfilling. I think that's the key. Fulfillment.
Yeah. Yeah, we had. I'd like everybody else. I mean, there was time we had problems that we didn't think we were going to make it. But that's like everybody else. If we had any problems, she hated fishing. Our first date was a fishing trip to the Salton Sea. So she didn't like much of anything I did, and I wasn't too crazy about anything she did. Everybody bet that we wouldn't be together 3 months. But we just went along with each other. I went along with what she liked. From the first date we had working at that date shed, I'd go cash. I just bought a 1951 Ford convertible, 289 flathead V8 with overdrive. As soon as I got my check, I still owed a couple of payments on it. After the first date, the next night, I told her to come down when I got my check. I cashed my check. I gave it to her. She went and paid my bills, put the gas tank in my car, come back and pick me up. And for almost 60 years, I did the same thing. Whenever I get my check, I signed it, give it to her, and she took care of everything. She was the shrewdest shopper of anybody I ever seen. Well, there for a while, we had a little shop making different kinds of wood crafts. Then we'd go to Hobby Lobby. She'd pick up a piece of wood and say, "What's that look like to you?" I said, "A block of wood." She could see what that looked like after she got it finished. Then we go to stores. Sometimes we might be a little short. She'd tell me, she said, "Now if you want anything, don't say nothing. Just hold it up." And she said, I got $175 for groceries. So I just go along. If I wanted something, I'd show it to her, which usually I just thought she was shrewd. But we'd get up there, and they would cashier get it all typed out. If she said we had $175 for groceries, the bill would be about $172, $173, $174, always. She could come within a few dollars of it every time. Never miss a lick. She was always that way.
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah, we had a great life. There are probably some things well, when we got married, I didn't propose to her like most people do. We were in a convertible going someplace, and I was driving. My brother was on one side, and she was sitting behind me and a couple other girls, and we went to the drive-in theater. So the girls, they was getting excited on whatever we was looking and kind of banging the back of the seat. I told Christy, I said, "Hey, if you shut up, I'll give you something." So I just reached behind me and handed her the engagement ring. So that's the way we got it got engaged. Then we were going to either get married then, or we were going to buy a new '55 Chevy and then get married later. So we decided that we were going to get married. So instead of getting married right in the hometown where everybody could go, we went to Quartzsite, Arizona, to a justice of the peace. They had to have somebody who was in the filling station come out to be a witness when we got married. We didn't have a witness. So then we come back, and 2 or 3 days later, after we got married, we traded a 51 Ford in for a 1955 Chevy Del Rey 210.
Wow. Sir,
Thank you again for everybody to listening to the Forgotten Faces podcast. You can find our show notes and our blog at forgottenfacespodcast.wordpress.com.